Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm going to be naming my favorite Stephen King character for every letter of the alphabet. So this is going to be my Stephen King characters A to Z video. And before I jump into it, I just want to make a few disclaimers here. So I was not consistent at all with like only using first names or last names. I just, whatever could fit, I fit into here. And a lot of these letters were a bit tricky to try to find, and I had to do a bit of digging and research, and you'll see once I get to those certain letters. But also, a lot of these letters in the alphabet have multiple and a plethora of characters to choose from. And in fact, I've only chosen about, or I'm sorry, I'm pulling from about 20 Stephen King books. So that's only about 25% of his books. So there's like 60 or so of his books that I'm just not naming any characters from. So by no means is this like an extensive, like these are my favorite characters. A lot of these characters are not my favorites. They would be nowhere near my top 10 or whatever, but I just, I had to go with something. So it'll make more sense when I get into it. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. And of course, starting out with the letter A, we have Alan Pangborn from the novel Needful Things. Now, of course, Needful Things is one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novels. I recently just updated my list, and it's now in my top 10. And this has a plethora of great characters. It's one of Stephen King's best, like, small-town novels. And, of course, this was, famously the last Castle Rock story. And so there's a lot of great characters to choose from in here. But Alan Pangborn is a really fun character throughout the novel. So yeah, I'm going to go with Alan Pangborn for the letter A. And for the letter B, this might be an unpopular pick, but I'm just going to go with Blaze. This was the first person that I thought of. And I know people don't love this book, but I just think, Richard Bachman, Stephen King does an excellent job. And this is one of his better, like, just character examinations. There's not really a lot of plot in this book, but Blaze himself as a character is actually one of my favorites. And for the letter C, there's two obvious choices for me, and I couldn't really narrow down which one, so I just went with both. Both some of my favorite female characters that Stephen King has ever done, and that would be Carrie White, Carrie, and Dolores Claiborne. Both, I love both of these books. This one's in my top 10, this one's just outside my top 10, and like I said, two of some of my favorite Stephen King female characters, especially Dolores Claiborne. But yeah, those are my answers for C. So for the letter D, you guys are probably not going to agree with me, but whatever. I love this character and this book. And that would be Barton Dawes from the novel Roadwork, my favorite Richard Bachman novel. And yeah, and again, just like with Blaze, not a lot of actual plot, but it's one of Richard Bachman and Stephen King's better character examinations, and I just think he's a fascinating individual. So yeah, I'm going to go with Barton Dawes. And for the letter E, we're going to go with one of, if not my favorite, Dark Tower character, and that would be Eddie Dean. And of course, the drawing of the three, my favorite Dark Tower novel is where we get introduced to Eddie Dean, and it's where I first fell in love with this character. He's just an amazing character, and I think most Dark Tower junkies would agree with me. For the letter F, we're going to go with one of the more underrated Stephen King protagonists, and that would be Egbert Fremantle from the novel Doomakey. This is an amazing novel, and Egbert Fremantle, like I said, is one of my favorite Stephen King protagonists. I think he and this book are very underrated, so if you haven't checked this out, go do so. And for the letter G, we're going back to Needful Things, going back to the villain of the book, and that would be Leland Gaunt. Definitely a top 10, possibly even top 5 Stephen King villain. And basically, he's the guy that opens up the shop Needful Things and gets people to like do dastardly stuff in the book. Just an excellent Stephen King villain. And for the letter H, we're going to go with William or Bill Halleck. And this is basically the lawyer in here that's pretty overweight, and he gets a gypsy curse on him, thinner, and he just starts losing weight at a rapid pace. And it's really fun to see his journey of like, oh, like I'm losing all this weight and I don't have to go on a diet or exercise. And then it's just fun to see him realize like, oh shit, I'm gonna die. So this book is just a lot of fun. And of course, he's not like an upstanding protagonist, but his story is very fun. And for the letter I, this was sort of hard to find, but I'm gonna kind of cheat a little bit, and I'm just gonna go with It, or the entity known as It. It goes by Pennywise, but I'm just, it's It. And do I really need to explain this one that much? I don't think so. And for the letter J, this was a hard decision between two characters, so I'm just going to include both of them. And that would, of course, be Johnny Smith from my all-time favorite Stephen King novel, The Dead Zone, and Jake Chambers from the Dark Tower series. And he's pretty much introduced really in this one as like a main character. And of course, Jake is a great name. For the letter K, there's actually two famous Kurts in Stephen King. There's Kurt Barlow from Salem's Lot, which I guess would be an honorable mention, but I'm actually going to go with Kurt Dusander from the novella that's in the novella collection Different Seasons, Apt Pupil. He's basically the old man that this young boy figures out is a Nazi, and he tries to exploit him in a very strange way, and his character dynamic with the young boy is interesting to read, and yeah, I love his character. And for the letter L, this might be more of an obscure pick, but if you've read If It Bleeds, you've read the novella Rat at the very end of this, and the main character in that is Drew Larson, and of course he's a writer character, and Stephen King is of course excellent with writing writer characters, and this one is no exception. He's basically a guy who has been writing short stories his whole life, but then he all of a sudden gets an excellent idea for a novel, and just the things he has to go through. Very, very good horror novella. And yeah, Drew Larson is a very underrated writer character. And for the letter M, we're going back to the ginormous novel of It, and we're going to go with Beverly Marsh. There's a lot of options, of course, in here for the Losers Club, but I always remember Beverly Marsh being one of, if not my favorite, of the Losers Club. So I've got Beverly Marsh for M. And for the letter N, this is kind of a cheeky choice, but I'm actually going to go with a novella that's in Just After Sunset titled N. It's just the letter N. If you have not read this one, we will be reading this later on in the year, and it's one of my all-time favorite novellas, and there's a character named simply N. So if you're intrigued by that, go check it out. So for the letter O, it took me a little bit of time to like stumble upon this, and once it like clicked with me, it hit me like a son of a whatever. The letter O, I'm going to have to go with Oi, which is one of, if not my favorite animal companions ever. And Oi is an animal in the Dark Tower, and he's awesome. Oi. And for the letter P, we're going to have to go with Paul Sheldon from my second favorite Stephen King novel, Misery. And of course, Paul Sheldon is the writer that gets kidnapped by his #1 fan, and he has to try to figure out how to escape and to deal with his situation. Fantastic character. All right, so the next letter was Q, and this was a very hard one to try to find. There are a few characters that have like a first name starting with Q, but I'm actually going to go with the character from the Dark Tower who's named Andrew Quick, and he is more famously known as the TikTok Man. So I won't go into spoilers, but if you've read The Dark Tower, you know who I'm talking about. And his name is Andrew Quick. All right, we're now going back to The Dark Tower for the letter R. And I've actually got two characters from The Dark Tower. So we're going to have to go with Roland Deschain, who is, of course, the gunslinger. And then also Randall Flagg, who is the main antagonist for not only The Dark Tower, but he shows up in a lot of different Stephen King books. So we've got Roland and Randall. And of course, for the letter S, if you couldn't tell that I love the Dark Tower series and the characters that are in it, we're going to have to go with Susanna. And that's just, I'm just holding this up because her name is literally in book 6's title, Song of Susanna, which is a very underrated book in the series. And her character is one of my favorites. Probably Eddie Dean is my favorite, but Susanna would probably be a second favorite. And for the letter T, we actually have two characters. I couldn't really decide. And they kind of both go together. They're related, father and son, in fact. And we're going to have to go with Jack Torrance, The Shining, and Danny Torrance from Dr. Sleep. Now, I think I might like Danny more just because we get his, progression from the first book, and then we fast forward, 30 some years later to what he's doing in the 2000s. So, but you can't really have one without the other. So, Jack and Danny. And now we're on to the letter U, which has a few notable options, but I'm going to go with Larry Underwood from The Stand. And you guys know that this is probably my pick for the most overrated Stephen King book, but I will admit this book is laden with fantastic Stephen King characters, and Larry Underwood is no exception. He was probably one of my favorite characters in the book, so I'm going to have to go with Larry Underwood. The letter V was also a little hard, and I had to kind of do a little bit of research, but then it hit me. One of the novellas in different seasons is The Body, and one of the characters, because there's a group of four young boys, one of them is named Vern Tessio. So I'm going to go with that. And The Body is, of course, one of the best Stephen King novellas and stories, and really fun friendship. And yeah, Vern is one of those boys. And for the letter W, there's two outstanding choices here, and I really could not make up my mind, so you're getting both. One of them is Wireman from the novel Doohickey, and one of them is Annie Wilkes from the novel Misery. Annie Wilkes is probably my favorite Stephen King villain of all time. She's excellent. And Wireman is the best friend companion to Egbert Fremantle, and their friendship is one of the best friendships Stephen King has ever written. So I really couldn't decide between the two, so you're getting both. So for the letter X, it was a bit hard to find, and I had to do a bit of digging, a bit of research, but I did find in the novel Doohickey that Egbert Fremantle's psychologist is named Dr. Xander Kamen, Xander with an X. And yeah, for all of these characters, I tried not to pick ones that are so minor that they really don't have any significance to the story. But Dr. Xander, even though he is a minor character, he is the one that convinces he is the one that convinces Edgar to move to Florida and to pick up a passion of drawing and painting. So Dr. Xander Kamen, X. So for the letter Y, it was definitely one of the harder ones to find and research, like a notable character. But I did find one in the novel Revival. And while most of this book is, of course, about Charles Jacobs, there is a man in here named Hugh Yates. And basically that man is like a record producer who later on in the main character's life gives him a job in music. And they have a significant talk about an experience that they've both had. So yeah, Hugh Yates. And of course, the last letter is Z, or Z for all you Canadians. Stacy. And this one took a little bit of thought, but then it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, oh yeah, Zelda from Pet Sematary. Yeah, a bit of a minor character, but she is important to Louis Creed's wife's story. Zelda is her dying sister, and it's basically why she has such a trouble with death, and it makes sense for the theme. So yeah, Zelda for the letter Z. All right, so hopefully I didn't miss any letters, and yeah, those are my favorite characters for every letter of the English alphabet. And like I said before, this is not an extensive list of like my all-time favorite characters. In fact, a lot of characters got put to the wayside just because a lot of the letters in here have multiple characters with that letter in their name, and I tried not to make it to where like each letter had like 4 or 5, but I narrowed it down, and yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Please leave down your list, if you can come up with all of them, your list of characters, Stephen King characters for all the letters of the alphabet. And also, if you're a content creator and you're interested in doing your own version of this, I'm not really going to tag anybody, but if you want to make this video and kind of come up with your own characters for these letters, I would love to watch it and compare. So if you want to, feel free to do so. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the YouTube channel and the Book Astronomer Discord and some other things. Join my Patreon if you want to support me there. I also have my Amazon wish list if you'd like to purchase me a book or two. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a fantastic day.